The notion of a social contract is one of the most influential political ideas of all time. It's the philosophical impetus for societies that have a foundational document like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or the UN Charter on Human Rights. And the two most influential philosophers in social contract theory are Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. By the end of this video, I hope you have a decent understanding of the interplay between Hobbes and Locke, the things they said, and how it changed the world. And I want to start by just defining the concept of a social contract theory. It's the idea that there's an unspoken, unwritten agreement between members of a society to sort of be part of that society and abide by the rules within that society, behave as a member of that society. And the idea is that this agreement forms the basis of one or more of a few things. The government's authority or legitimacy in governing the people. Political obligations, like the fact that society's members are obligated to follow the rules, abide by the regulations that the government passes, and also sometimes even it's the basis of one's ethical obligations. And that's often summed up with the kind of slogan that society is based, or the government's authority is based, on the consent of the governed. Hobbes started the discussion of the social contract, and he begins with an analysis of human nature. That analysis particularly sort of culminates with a thought experiment about what he called the state of nature. And the state of nature, we can sort of think of it in two ways. In one sense, it's an anarchistic kind of situation where there's no social hierarchy. There's no government. There's no one making any kind of rules and enforcing them. And you can think of this as, Hobbes did, as like a prehistoric condition of human beings. He seemed to think that that was the case. But on the other hand, if you're not comfortable with assuming that human beings once existed in that kind of state, and actually today we have good reason to believe through the science of anthropology that human beings have always had hierarchical structures of some kind within the tribes that they existed in, even going back to like the first humans. However, Hobbes also talks about it in terms of a condition that's sort of the internal natural state of human beings. He views organized society as a kind of artificial construction, and he thinks that if you just kind of look inward, you can see what we're like naturally. And if there were no rules, no government to sort of to interfere with us, you can think about what that would be like. Now, Locke picks up on the idea of the state of nature and wants to explore the same concepts that Hobbes did. So I want to go through what each philosopher said about this sort of side by side. I think it'd be a productive way of looking at the whole thought experiment from the point of view of Hobbes, and at the same time from the point of view of Locke, because what Locke says about it can be viewed as like literally a response to Hobbes. Like each point that Hobbes makes about it, you find a slightly different point being made by Locke. So one of the first things that Hobbes says about people in the state of nature is that they would be basically equal. That is, they're approximately equal in terms of their abilities. And we're not used to thinking of, people being of equal capabilities, because some people might be more intelligent, some people might be stronger, but Hobbes says that those things wouldn't matter in the state of nature. He specifically brings up that they would have equal ability to kill one another, and he seems to think that's going to be of consequence. And that's because Hobbes thinks that our fundamental nature as human beings is that we're self-interested. And so in this state of nature, complete absence of rules, absence of government, our self-interests are going to end up conflicting with nothing to prevent us from harming other people. Locke, on the other hand, interestingly, also brings up equality in the state of nature. But what he says about it is quite different. He says that people are equal, but he means it in a normative sense, in a moral sense. He says no one is, like, to put it in kind of colloquial terms, no one is the boss of anyone else. That's the fundamental fact about the state of nature. So no one is like of a higher social status naturally. This might not seem like a revolutionary idea today, but it's actually goes against a lot of ideas that are around in society in Locke's time, that nobody is just by nature like above anybody else. Class is not a natural thing, for instance, and even the idea that the monarchy and the aristocracy was like naturally above everyone else, like by their nature, is something that Locke is repudiating here, and so that's kind of revolutionary. So then, after equality, both philosophers go on to discuss sort of basically freedom in the state of nature. They tend to use the term liberty, and for Hobbes, you have liberty. Just he specifically says that it just means the absence of impediments, and nothing more than that. So for Hobbes, the fact that you have liberty to do something is nothing more than the fact that there's no one there to stop you from doing it. And so in the state of nature, according to Hobbes, you have complete liberty to do anything you see fit, really anything that you perceive as being to your self-preservation. And he describes what he calls the right of nature, so to speak, natural right. But natural right for him is a right to do whatever you want, and that includes like taking stuff from other people, killing them if you need to do that to get their stuff, and so it's kind of like in the state of nature, everyone's kind of just would be an egoistic kind of agent going around, doing whatever they saw fit to others in order to serve their own self-interest. And Hobbes says that there are various reasons why people's interests would conflict in the state of nature. Competition for resources. And then even if it's not direct competition over resources, just what he says, diffidence over it. Diffidence, like being concerned that someone else might be able to take the resources like more efficiently than you. So, if there's this guy over here and I think he's really he's efficient like apple gatherer, right? And he's going to go grab all the apples. Well, I don't want him doing that. So, maybe I'm just going to have a little conflict with him, maybe take him out before he gets a chance to do that. And then also glory, he says, is another source of conflict. And, he has specific ways he defines each of these terms. So glory for him is like the idea that I would want to have a reputation that nobody comes and messes with me, right? And so I'm just going to have conflicts with others just for the sake of that reputation, So that's Hobbes' take on like freedom in the state of nature. Now, what Locke says about freedom in the state of nature is quite in conflict with what Hobbes said about it. For Locke says that the state of nature is a state of great liberty, but not license, and he seems to be referring, without saying it, to Hobbes there, and the right to sort of do whatever you want in the state of nature. Locke says that the state of nature has a law to govern it. And by this he means that within the state of nature there's still such a thing as morality. And for Locke, that's based on reason. He says reason is the law of nature. Because for Locke, our natural state as humans, what's essential to us and basic to our nature, is being rational. And so, you think rationally about the question, do I have a right to take something from someone else? And the answer, according to Locke, is no, because of that point he made before about status. And this is reminiscent of an argument we looked at against egoism. That I don't have a higher status than you in the state of nature, right? We're equals, and so why should I be able to come and take stuff from you? Why should I be able to come kill you and do what I want with you? That doesn't make sense according to Locke. And he's also willing to he invokes the notion of God in his discussion here as well, which Hobbes never does, interestingly. And Locke says, maybe there would be a non-religious way to make this point, as I just kind of said with James Rachel's. But the way Locke makes it at one point, he says, God didn't make anyone like the Lord of anyone else in the state of nature. So that means, according to Locke, that there are certain rights that people have, and it's not reasonable for you to interfere with those rights. You just being equal to them, you not having some kind of, you're not the king of them or anything. You're not the lord of them. So they have a right to life. And that means that you can't come and interfere with their life. That you can't come and kill them. They have a right to liberty. You don't have a right for someone else to be your slave. And they have a right to property. So you don't have a right to go and take any property that anyone happens to have. Now we'll get to how does anyone have property in the state of nature? But he thinks so. These are natural rights for Locke. And you notice how it's like the same terminology, but very different point, right? Hobbes, let's talk about natural rights. Well, your natural rights, your rights in the state of nature to do whatever you want, including harming others. And then with Locke, you have this discussion of natural rights that's more like today. We think in terms of people having, human rights of life, liberty, and property, and maybe we even think they have some other natural rights. But these are the fundamental ones for Locke. And one of the key aspects of the state of nature for Locke, and this might also kind of have to do with conflict, as we saw Hobbes finishes this discussion of rights, of freedoms in the state of nature, in terms of conflict. Locke makes the point that each person in the state of nature has judicial and executive powers. So, each person is the adjudicator of whether someone is violating their rights or not, right? Or somebody else's rights, right? You see somebody who's taking property from this guy over here. Well, there's no government, there's nobody in charge. It's up to you, it's up to everybody to be the judge, right? That violation of natural rights, and also to execute the punishment on that, right? So he specifically says, everybody has those powers, which in organized society we grant to a select few. So here we get this very different discussion of freedom in the state of nature from the two philosophers. Now, the next sort of topic that comes up, again, I think for both philosophers, is the consequences of living in this sort of state. So if we look at Hobbes, where we have this egoistic agents of equal abilities coming into conflict with each other, with a complete right to do whatever they want, the consequence is war. And it's a particular kind of war that he describes as it's a war of all against all, right? I mean, it's just a constant battle for survival, right? Where any time, the next person you see is probably going to try to take something from you, including your life. And maybe you ought to do the same, right? Maybe that's what's to your advantage. And in the state of nature, again, for Hobbes, unlike for Locke, he specifically says there's no such thing as justice. And so it seems that for Hobbes, there is no such thing as morality until you establish a government. If we're just in the state of nature, it's anarchy. Well, nothing is immoral, nothing's wrong, because he seems to have a kind of an egoistic bent to what he's saying here. That who could blame anybody for sort of like just do whatever you see fit to preserve your self-interest. But there is an objective evaluation of what this is like for Hobbes. He thinks it is the worst possible situation, the worst possible condition of life. He says there's life is just a constant battle. So there's no industry, there's no arts, there's no science, there's no thinking about any of that stuff. All there is the constant battle. And he says it's continual fear of death, and life would be solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, what would life be like in the state of nature for Locke? It's going to be very different. Locke does admit that, there's less security in the state of nature. However, he specifically says the state of nature is not the same thing as the state of war. And that's a direct reference to Hobbes, although it doesn't use Hobbes' name. He says, some philosophers might have thought this, but the state of nature is not the same thing as war. It's just a situation where people have nothing but their own rationality in terms of their dealings with each other. You have those natural rights that are based on reason. It's not reasonable that I would be above you. It's not reasonable that you would be above me. In order for war to happen, somebody has to break that kind of rationality, and kind of treat themselves as like as the lord of another. I have to behave unreasonably in thinking that I have the right to do something to you that I don't, or you to me. So state of nature is not war, and war is not the state of nature. He says that a war could break out within the state of nature, or it could break out within organized society, right? I mean, you could have a society with rules and everything, but then different factions end up going to war with each other. And he describes it in the usual kind of way, where people have plans of action against each other's lives and property, and they're pursuing those. And he says that this has to do with the violation of those natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And if someone violates any of those rights, then either you have recourse to a higher authority, where you can say, hey, this guy broke the rules, he took my property or something, and you can tell that to a judge and they can give you redress. Or if that's not possible because you're in the state of nature, or because you have no availability of that within organized society, then you could consider that an act of war. He brings up an example specifically of, suppose somebody comes and tries to steal your property, such as say, let's say they're trying to steal your jacket, right? He says, since they're violating my property right, which, property is the way that I preserve myself in the world as well, I can treat this as a violation of my life as well. And so I can treat that as an act of war. And for example, he discusses self-defense in this context. And so if this person, say, tries to take my jacket from me by force, and there's no authority to stop them, I have a right to treat that as an act of war and defend myself, potentially killing the person. And so it's interesting that he gives this example. It's something that, within our organized society, we have a rule that you're not supposed to, if someone tries to steal your jacket, you can't just kill them, right? I mean, it has to be a last recourse. But here's Locke discussing it in the context of seems to be suggesting this is like a natural right. So as I've already pointed out, for Locke, there's morality in the state of nature, and he admits that it's not great. There's a problem with the state of nature, but it's not the worst possible scenario for human beings, and this is going to end up being important later on, because when both philosophers talk about establishing authority, for Hobbes, since the state of nature is the worst ever, the worst possible scenario, he's in favor of a very strong central authority, in fact, an unlimited one. Whereas Locke thinks that you establish an authority, but if conditions within the organized society with a government and with rules are worse than in the state of nature, which they could be, then it's no longer, the government's no longer legitimate. Both philosophers also use the term natural law as a kind of a term for how people would behave in the state of nature, but that phrase has very different meanings for Locke than it does for Hobbes. When Hobbes uses the term natural law, he means nothing more than a principle of self-interest. And he deliberately kind of makes it a little ambiguous whether he's using the term law descriptively, in the sense of like a law of gravity. Like the law of gravity isn't like, you know, a law that's made that, you know, all the planets have to obey this law. It's a description of how things go, right? And so he seems to at times be treating his laws of nature are just a description of what people do because they're self-interested agents. On the other hand, he's not willing to completely just leave it as a description, because, you know, he also talks about it somewhat normatively, just not in like a moral sense, maybe in a prudential sense, in the sense of prudence. Like, here's a principle of self-interest that it would make sense for everyone to follow. And he comes up with a couple of specific natural laws. The first one is that you seek peace. And that's a consequence of living in this state of constant war. It's the most miserable possible situation, and you're quite aware of this. And so the very first thing on everyone's mind, according to Hobbes, is how do we get out of this situation? How do we establish peace, right? And so that's the first natural law, according to Hobbes. The second natural law is that you give up rights. That is, in the state of nature, remember, you have a right to do whatever you want. You have the right to anything. But as a consequence of your seeking peace, that you would be willing to give up your rights if other people are willing to give up their rights, the same right. That is, you know, I have a right to come and bash you over the head and take your stuff, but then you have that right to do that to me. So, like, I don't want that. And are you willing to give up that right? If you're willing to give up that right, then I'll give it up too, and we won't bash each other over the head, right? And take each other's stuff. The idea here is that we form an organized society with rules, and Hobbes thinks that giving up rights is directly like what a contract means. I mean, he says that's all it is to have a contract. It means you give up rights. It makes some sense if you think about, you know, you have a contract with your employer, right? That you have to be there at a certain time. Well, that means you're giving up your right to go and do something else, right? And your employer agrees in the contract that they are going to pay you this money. You know, that means that they give up their right to go and do something else with it. So for Hobbes, that's all it means to have a contract. So here we get the willingness to create this this social contract. Now, Locke also uses the term natural law, but he uses that term in a very different way. It's in keeping with an older traditional use of that term, natural law, where it sort of refers to objective morality that exists whether anyone is aware of it or not, and it's sort of derived from reason. So it's again the normative principles based on the fact that we're all equal, morally speaking, that nobody has like a status over anybody else. And so Locke doesn't have like a set of natural laws, like here's law 1, law 2, law 3, because for him it's a vaster kind of system of moral principles based on reason. But in the context of this kind of natural law, Locke also sort of justifies the property right, the natural property right. He says that property can occur in the state of nature. It happens when you mix your labor with the world. So, I mean, there's apples over here, maybe, let's say, growing on a tree. I know that apples actually are a domestic fruit, but let's just say, right, there's this wild berries growing or something. You go and you collect them. And now they were just out there in the world. Now they've been mixed with your labor. So that now is it's your property because you've gone and you've worked to get it. There's a limit on that though, and it's determined by rationality. He says the limit is like what you can use. If somebody goes and they gather all the apples, right, hundreds of apples, and they just put them away somewhere in a little hut, and hide them from everybody else, but it's so many that there's no way they could eat all those, and they're just gonna rot. Locke says they have no right to do that. That's irrational because you're destroying something that has a use. So that's a limit on your ability to acquire property in the state of nature. On the other hand, he mentions that when we form organized society, that's why we create currency, because now you have like an imperishable property, right? It's a representation of property that it doesn't go bad. So it's more reasonable for you to have, a certain amount, unlimited. It's not clear what would Locke say about people who have so much money that they. That it's hard to imagine them using it in any productive way. I mean, currency is imperishable, but that doesn't mean that it's. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the quantity of money that a person can accumulate with a reasonable expectation of using it in some way would be unlimited. So that's left somewhat open in Locke's discussion of it, it seems to me, or maybe someone can find where he says something that implies an answer on this. So then the upshot of the whole discussion for both philosophers is that people have an incentive to come together and form this sort of social contract, what they call it, a social contract. And it basically means organized society that is maintained by a kind of unspoken agreement. But the kind of motivations for each philosopher are very different, and the trade-off. And it results in a very different kind of consequences in terms of the balance of organized society and the stability of it as well. For Hobbes, out of those natural laws, it follows that people will form society, and it's because of the inherent danger and the terribleness of the state of nature. So you form this contract, which is a mutual surrender of rights, where you're giving up the right that you had in the state of nature, which was this horrible right to do anything to anyone that everyone else had as well. Then on the other hand, for Locke, it's quite different in terms of like, why do people form the state of nature? He does discuss the precariousness of the state of nature, that it's not as maybe secure as organized society, but explicitly as a motivation for forming the social contract. He actually mentions impartiality. The idea that, remember, in the state of nature for Locke, each person is like the judge, the judge, jury, and executioner of their natural rights, right? So, like, each person has to decide, like, has this person violated my natural rights, or has this person violated his natural rights? And then everybody else is also of equal authority to do so. And so this creates a potential for conflicts, because people can judge things differently. And so what we need from the state to get away from, according to Locke, is not so much that it's this horrible, dangerous situation. It's not like that bad. It's just people living under their own rationality. But we need to set up an impartial third parties to judge these issues of rights. So, whether someone has violated your natural rights or not, we actually, we form society to have a more fair kind of system, right? Where there's an impartial system, there's somebody impartial that's judging between two parties, right? If someone says, "Oh, they violated my rights," and the other one says, "No, that's not true. They violated my rights," we want to set up an impartial judge to determine that. So it's quite different from, Hobbes is saying it's terror, it's fear, it's we're gonna die any minute. We just set up this. We need to set up this society to escape. For Locke, it's a concern for fairness. At least that's a big part of it for Locke. That we actually just want to make things more fair. So that's the basis for the social contract, and the trade-off for Locke is quite different. So for Locke, you don't give up natural rights. Of course, for him, the natural right is not the right to do whatever you want, but you have these natural rights, and then when you enter into an organized society with rules, you don't give those up at all. What you give up is your position as the judge, jury, and executioner over those rights. You give up authority to be the determiner of whether those natural rights have been violated or not. So we enter into organized society with rules, and the whole point of it is actually to preserve our natural rights, even more so by having impartial judges set up to preside over that. And so when you look at the difference between the two philosophers in terms of what you're giving it up and why you're giving it up, you can see the cause for the next big difference which is that Hobbes thinks that it's to everyone's advantage to set up a very strong central authority. And for Hobbes, the best way to do this is monarchy. So he's a monarchist, and he thinks you should set up a king, and the king should have like absolute authority, because he thinks it's the most stable system, and it provides the strongest like escape from the state of nature. If anybody can like go against the king, then that's just leading back. That's just leading back to the state of nature, which is the worst thing possible. So we set up a king, we give the king unlimited authority, and hopefully that the king is going to govern, in a way that is to the benefit of everyone as much as possible. But if not, for Hobbes, that doesn't justify going against the king. It's you never want to do that, because if we were to overturn the king, if we were to get rid of the king, then we go back towards the state of nature, and we're going to end up in the worst possible scenario once again. And every kind of breakdown of authority kind of leads to that. So if the king is nasty to his people, then Hobbes's thought on that is that it's too bad. That's unfortunate. Hopefully the next king will be better. For Locke, on the other hand, since the state of nature for Locke is not the worst case at all, and it's totally possible that you can have a rulership that treats the people worse than they would be treated in the state of nature, since the state of nature is just people living, according to their own rational thought process. There are limits on government authority from Locke's point of view. If, for example, if the government isn't working to preserve those natural rights, or if it actually interferes with those natural rights, life, liberty, and property, then it's making illegitimate moves. It's moving against what it was established for, and so the people have not only a right but an obligation to get rid of it, start again. And if they get rid of the government, then yes, they're returning to the state of nature. But of course, that's not like the worst scenario possible. And from there, you can rebuild. And so Locke is open to the possibility of justified revolution, whereas Hobbes is not. And this is why Locke is considered a more kind of foundational, maybe exponent of liberalism than Hobbes. Hobbes is more conservative in this sense that he's a monarchist, whereas for Locke, that it's the consent of the people to be governed by the government is something that can be given, it can be taken away. Hobbes was arguing that it's you should never take away the consent of the governed. We always consent to whatever the government is doing, because we'll go back to the state of nature if we don't. Now, there's one final issue that arises for Hobbes, and not so much for Locke, if at all. And it has to do with the fact that for Hobbes, there are no rules in the state of nature. But then once we set up an organized society, when we set up rules, now there are rules, and everybody has to follow the rules. And Hobbes is very particular that everyone has to follow the rules. And it kind of suggests a question of a moral anti-realism. If Hobbes is willing to embrace moral anti-realism and or egoism in the state of nature, then why doesn't that apply once society is set up too? And so Hobbes considers this kind of objection. He says that someone could say, if it's to my interest to kind of break the rules of society, the social contract, and I think I can get away with it, then why wouldn't I do that, right? If there's no morality, like without organized society, then, isn't it the same thing? Anytime I can get away with something that breaks society's rules, doesn't the same principle apply, that, hey, it's in my self-interest, there's no such thing as morality because I can get away with this? And I find Hobbes' answer to this questionable myself. He starts by saying, quoting the Bible, there's a Bible verse where it says, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And now Hobbes says, oh, this is like saying, the fool has said in his heart, there is no such thing as justice. Which is interesting, because he had said that in the state of nature there's no justice. But now, once we have a society with rules, it would be a fool. Only a fool would say that there's no such thing as justice now. The justice is like obeying the rules of society. And so, if the issue is like, what if I can get away with breaking the rules, and that's to my advantage? Hobbes specifically brings up what he calls a third law of nature in order to address this. And he said the third law of nature is that you keep contracts. You abide by agreements that you've made. And you've tacitly made an agreement that you'll live in the society you live in, and that you'll follow the rules of that society. And you have to continue to abide by those rules. But now remember that laws of nature for Hobbes are just principles of self-interest. It's not supposed to be like a moral rule that has that's anything other than my own self-interest. So how is that in my self-interest to keep contracts, to continue to abide by the rules where I could get away with it, And he just seems to say, well, you should never expect to get away with it, even if, sometimes people do get away with it, but you should never expect to. And furthermore, to the extent that you do get away with it, you're breaking down society. And so it may seem rational to you, but you are bringing the whole group of people that live in this society, the members of the society, closer and closer towards that worst scenario ever, the state of nature. And so it's actually a bad idea. And the reason I worry about this response that Hobbes has, and I'm not sure how convinced I am that this is a good response, is it has to do with the relationship between what's a good idea for me individually versus what's a good idea for all of us collectively. And you can argue that they don't necessarily coincide. There's an interesting example from the field of game theory that applies here. Game theory is coming up with these sort of games where people have different choices that result in more or less of some kind of positive output. You can just consider it like utilitarian points, or you could use money as the output of the game. And if you assume that the only objective for each person in the game is to maximize their output, and let's just say it's in terms of points, then you have choices that are objectively most likely to lead to getting the highest points in the game. And there are some interesting kind of things that can result in that interplay. A famous example is a game called The Prisoner's Dilemma. And the reason it's called The Prisoner's Dilemma is because the original kind of setup for the game had to do with two prisoners who are offered various alternatives in terms of whether they rat on each other or not. But actually, I think there's simpler ways of setting up the game. For example, let's say that there are two players in the game, and you're paired up with another player. Let's say you can be player A, the other player is player B, and you're given a choice whether to cooperate with each other or else to defect from cooperating. What you're cooperating over or defecting over is doesn't matter. But suppose I put you in, I have you play this game, and your choices are subject to the following payoff schedule. It depends what you choose, and then it depends also on what the other person chooses. If you choose to cooperate, and the other person also chooses to cooperate, you'll get 3 points each. If you choose to defect and the other person also chooses to defect, you only get 1 point each. But if one of you chooses to defect and the other one chooses to cooperate, the person who chose to defect gets 5 points, and the person who chooses to cooperate gets nothing. Now, here's why this game leads to some interesting results. Suppose you are allowed to discuss with each other for like 5 minutes or so what to do. But then afterwards, you're going to submit your choice anonymously, right? So, you're player A, that player B is not going to know what you chose. And you're not going to know what they chose. And now, suppose we ask, like, what's objectively the best choice? Well, there are two ways of looking at this. What's objectively the best choice for the collective, for the two of you together? Well, that's the first possibility. In the upper left, that you both cooperate, because that's 6 points total, more than any other possibility. And the worst overall is the lower right corner, only 2 points total, so 1 point each. So collectively, this is the best choice, and collectively, this is the worst choice. However, that doesn't mean that that's the objectively best choice for you. Because if you think about it like strictly from your point of view, you're player A, right? You don't know what player B is going to do. But no matter what they do, you will be better off if you choose defect, right? Because if they chose cooperate, well, you're getting 5 points and they're getting nothing. On the other hand, if they chose defect, well, at least you didn't end up with nothing. You got 1 point. So no matter what the other person chooses, you're better off choosing to defect. And so the argument is, not knowing what the other person is going to choose, the objectively correct choice for you is to choose defect. Now, this creates a kind of nasty situation, though, right? Because player B is going to go through the same reasoning process. And it matters that neither one of them has any other objective in this game other than to get as much points as possible, right? If you have other, if they have other things like sort of a moral principle that I don't want to screw over the other player, well, then that's totally different. But let's say the game is, your objective in the game is to maximize your take in points. So then both players would realize they're better off choosing defect, and then that would lead to both getting 1 point each, a measly 2 points, the worst on the chart, the worst possible outcome. And the reason why this relates to social contract theories like Hobbes's especially, is because he seems to be maintaining that we derive morality out of self-interest, out of pure self-interest. We come to this realization that, it's to our advantage as a collective to set up these rules. And then once the rules are set up, the reason why we never want to break the rules is because we'd be taking the collective back towards anarchy. But the prisoner's dilemma seems to suggest that, objectively speaking, each individual's best choice, right, to maximize their take is to break the rules, which means that like individual self-interest can't be the basis of collective self-interest. And so there's a problem for the idea that our interest in society as a whole benefiting doesn't conflict with my individual self-interest. And so that might be a problem for social contract theory in general, but especially when it comes to Hobbes's version, it seems to me, because there's no motivation for preserving the social contract on Hobbes's version other than my own self-interest of not wanting to go back to the state of nature, but there can be a conflict there, as we see with the prisoner's dilemma. Well, in any case, I hope this video has shed some light on Hobbes and Locke as you go through the readings from Leviathan and from the two treatises of government, and try to compare and contrast the very different things they have to say about the same kind of project of forming an organized society out of a state of nature.